and good afternoon. My name is Natalie Ricketts, and this is an article debrief over a mathematical cornucopia of pumpkins by Glenn Gebhardt. In this article, Gebhardt explains a project he did with some students investigating and measuring attributes of a pumpkin. The students analyzed the data in various ways and looked for any trends and connections that they could find. Gebhardt outlines some questions that the students asked, such as how round is the pumpkin, do larger pumpkins fall faster than small ones, and do larger pumpkins have larger seeds. He also explained how he incorporated mathematics and science in an integrated fashion throughout this experiment. The first quote that I chose is on page 69, and it states, "At the heart of this investigation is the opportunity for students to gain confidence in asking their own questions and using mathematical tools and analysis to answer these questions." I found this quote interesting because throughout the article it talks about the students asking their own questions after being prompted a little bit by the teacher to ask certain questions. I found it really interesting how the students were allowed to sort of come up with some of their own questions, and later on in the article, also on page 78, Gebhardt states also that the students were enthusiastic about using the authentic data they themselves had gathered about their group's pumpkin. It seems to me when students gather their own data or pose their own questions in taking ownership for their work, their individual work, they get much more interested in whatever it is they're doing, whether it be a science experiment or in math class or any subject. That's if students have a hand in actually coming up with the questions or the experiment, or are being actively engaged rather than just taught at or having to complete a certain amount of questions or work. I feel like they take more interest in those types of things. So this experiment to me is a very good example of how that interactive learning can be much more beneficial than just students do a routine set of questions. And this quote really outlines and highlights that theme throughout this article. The second quote that I found interesting in this article and that stood out to me is on page 77, and it states, "Taking the seed through the entire life cycle satisfies a number of science standards." The context of this article is Gebhardt is saying that some of the students that were utilized in the experiment took home some of the seeds they got out of the pumpkins, and he took the experiment to another level with watching the seeds germinate and then taking them home over the summer. And some of the kids even grew some pumpkins or little ones, and that really takes the experiment to another level, in my opinion. And it's evident throughout this article that the students are hitting multiple different standards and covering a lot of material, even in this just one sort of project or experiment. They're using math, they're using science terms, and utilizing data. They are creating different types of charts and analyzing the data that they themselves have collected. So what stood out to me with this quote in particular is just the very multi-dimensional nature of this experiment and this project that these children have done. The teacher, by using this one experiment or this one project, has really multiplied or amplified the kids' exposure to many different types of investigation, and that is covering a lot more than just, for example, one standard. And so I think as a teacher, this type of thing, these types of multifaceted experiments and lessons can be very useful to engage children and have them really take grasp of some of the concepts that we're attempting to get them to understand in the classroom. So as a teacher, I would find this type of lesson very beneficial. The third and final quote that I found in this article to discuss is on page 78, and it states, "For investigating in mathematics and science to engage students, they must be fun." This quote really stood out to me because it seems very obvious, but I think a lot of times teachers can get wrapped up in the standards and covering all the material that they need to cover, but in reality, types of experiments and just general lessons even of this type nature, where kids are interactive and they're engaged and they're actively contributing, that goes much further than just having kids fill out a worksheet or just do something very routine and, for lack of a better term, boring. I think that these types of experiments or just lessons in general can be very useful and work best really to engage the kids and to get them to really grasp onto the concepts you're trying to teach them. In this article, for example, they were measuring the mass and the diameter of the pumpkin, just various aspects of the pumpkin. And I would think that this type of interactive lesson would be much more useful to them in getting the information to stick, rather than completing a worksheet on mass or diameter, where they're just writing and measuring at their desk theoretically. So I think that these types of lessons for kids are the most beneficial and really go the furthest in engaging the kids and getting in all of the information that teachers need to get in. Because teachers in reality are responsible for standards, and they are responsible for kids retaining all the knowledge they're supposed to in the given year that they are in school. And with an activity like this pumpkin activity, you can cover a lot of different standards and information while still being fun and interactive and engaging the students, unlike a typical sit-down classroom lesson or experiment. I think that these are the types of experiences and the information that kids are going to remember the most and really take with them to subsequent grades and on to higher levels of thinking as they progress in their school career.
Thank you for listening to this article debrief of A Mathematical Cornucopia of Pumpkins.